Welcome to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well, broadcasting on KSQD Santa Cruz on 90.7 FM and live streaming at ksqd.org. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, licensed marriage and family therapist. On August 16th, a rare tropical storm system rolled through California's central coast, packing an unusual combination of dry lightning and high winds that triggered wildfires throughout the region. One of these was the CZU Lightning Fire Complex that scorched over 86,500 acres in the Santa Cruz Mountains, killing one person and injuring another. The fire destroyed 1,490 structures, the majority of which were homes. At its peak, 60,000 people were evacuated in our county of just 250,000. A fortunate change in the weather and winds brought much-needed time for more fire crews to arrive and for fire breaks to be created, protecting the University of California, mountain and coastal communities, and ultimately allowing firefighters to get a leg up on containment. Santa Cruz County had not seen a disaster of this magnitude since the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. At the time of this recording, the fire is 95% contained, and yet still some 921 people remain evacuated. In a community of our size, it seems no one has been unaffected. So many of us either evacuated ourselves, prepared to evacuate, or were busy housing, feeding, or helping others who were evacuated. We all have friends or family who lost their homes or are still evacuated. A natural disaster like this, occurring while we're 6 months into the worldwide coronavirus pandemic, creates an imposing mental health challenge, the likes of which most of us have never seen. At the time of this broadcast, it will have been 7 weeks since the fires began, and in today's show, we'll be discussing the mental health impacts and how we as individuals and as a community recover. And while we will be discussing our recent wildfires, much of what we talk about will be applicable to recovery from disasters in general. Our hope is that this show will help support the emotional, psychological, and spiritual journey of recovery for many of our community members, and that it helps to weave together some of the support available. We are also recording this show in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, so my guests and I are all in remote locations. As a result, you'll hear some background and computer noises in the recording, and we ask for your understanding for these sound quality challenges. In putting this show together, we spoke with a number of fire victims who were all going through so much, and most were not ready to come on the show and speak about it yet. So we're especially grateful to welcome guests Sam and Sarah Clarkson, who lost the home they built in Bonnie Doon 19 years ago. Sarah, originally from Massachusetts, and Sam from Tennessee, were excited to come to the Santa Cruz area so that their kids could grow up close to their cousins in the nearby town of Soquel. And Sam was an avid windsurfer who wanted to live close to the world-class windsurfing area of Santa Cruz's north coast. In Bonnie Doon, they raised their 2 children, a daughter now 19 and a son 17. Sam is an arts instructor at Cabrillo College and a ceramic artist. In the fire, he also lost the home studio he had built on their property. Sarah is a congressional learning coordinator for Temple Bethel, running the Young Families and the Temple School programs. They have now found a rental in town and are sorting out what happens next, and if they are able or want to rebuild. Also with us today is psychologist Diane Bridgman, who has maintained a clinical psychology practice here in Santa Cruz for over 25 years. Her work includes giving keynote addresses, offering workshops, teaching, and working on policy development. Dr. Bridgman was past president of the Monterey Bay Psychological Association and currently chairs its disaster mental health response and care committees. Ever since the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, and for the 25 years since, Dr. Bridgman has been volunteering for the American Red Cross. Dr. Bridgman also teaches classes in disaster mental health fundamentals and psychological first aid, and has given talks to Red Cross organizations around the world. She's worked at the manager level of the local Red Cross chapter and coordinator of the American Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Team, and most recently responded to the CZU wildfire that raged through our local communities this past August and September. I'm so grateful to welcome all of these guests to State of Mind. Welcome, and thank you, Diane, Sam, and Sarah, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Deborah.
You know, Diane, can we start with you? Would you be willing to help us understand what constitutes a disaster?
Right. There are several different definitions, of course. I tend to use the one that the International Federation for the Red Cross and Red Crescent, that is located in Geneva, Switzerland, where I visited. They put it together for a fairly succinct way. They say it's a sudden, calamitous kind of event that is serious enough that it disrupts the functioning of the community and the society and causes either human, material, economic, environmental damage and losses that exceed the community's or society's ability to cope using our own resources.
So while today we're going to be talking about community level disasters, is some of what we talk about likely to be useful for people who experience smaller scale or more personal tragedies?
Yes, I would think so. Basically, trying to know that if we can anticipate what can happen, the spectrum of possibilities, we can better prepare and perhaps be less impacted in a way that's problematic.
So certainly the fires we experience fall within that definition. Yeah,
Absolutely, yes, it does.
yeah. Well, Sam and Sarah, I want to turn to you first and say I'm so sorry for the loss of your home and all that you've been through. And I can't say enough how much I appreciate you both being here to speak about it and share some of your experience with our listeners. Um, Sarah, I understand that you were home alone. You were home, and Sam was out of town at the time that you had to evacuate because of the advancing fire. How did you learn about the need to evacuate, and how much warning were you given?
So I would say after the lightning storm, so that Sunday morning, I was awoken by my neighbor Jill, who actually trained as a firefighter, banging on my door at 6 a.m. And I smelled fire as soon as I woke up. And I came downstairs, and she was very, very upset and telling me that there are 10 fires around us. She's been listening on the radio. They're already packed up and ready to leave. So that was Sunday morning, 6 a.m. And I we've had two other situations like this, sort of. So I wasn't taking it that seriously. I hadn't had coffee yet. I was thinking, well, maybe she's just overreacting. I asked her where the fires were, and she said, I think it was like Swanton, Davenport area, and Big Basin. And that to me seemed really far away. We're up the summit. So actually, my son got on his bike and rode up to Eagle Rock, and he met a firefighter who was looking with binoculars. And the firefighters, he just talked to him. He said, "Should we be worried about this?" And the firefighter said, "There's no mandatory evacuation right now." So he came home, and I was like, "Okay." I went for a walk in Fall Creek with my friend Bonnie, and when I got there, they had lost power and internet, and I had also lost internet and cell phone, but we still had power, and they were just sitting on their front porch and talking about what would they bring, what would we collect, what kinds of things. So this is Sunday morning, and I had read somewhere about, and I can't remember when I had read something, probably from State Farm, that said, when you evacuate, you should take passports, social security cards, car titles, birth certificates. So those were like the first four things I already had in a file since the last evacuation. I had never taken it out. So those were like four things on my mind. And we were just, as I was walking with Bonnie, we were talking about things that we might need to take. And I'd say by 11 o'clock that night, I had packed my smallest suitcase. Um, I had gone up to Braymore where there was cell reception, and I had called Sam and asked him, we might have to evacuate. What do you want? And he's like, well, have Noah grab my favorite surfboard and our backpacking gear. We had just bought all this lightweight backpacking gear, and I said, that's it? That's all you want? And he's like, yeah, I think so. So I got that in. I got the backpacking gear. Oh, and his two wetsuits too. Um, and my daughter had said her two saddles. I hadn't put them in the car then. But by 11 o'clock, I had packed the smallest suitcase, like thinking like a week of clothes. And I grabbed a few pictures off the wall and about 25. But there were so many more that I didn't grab, and two baby albums, one from each child, um, and went to sleep at 11 o'clock that night. So that was Sunday night, and felt like, okay, I can go to sleep now because I'm ready if anything happens. Well, Monday was a work day for me. I had power, I had internet, I had cell phone. It was just like a normal day. I was on Zoom calls. I was working Monday and Tuesday, the same thing. But Tuesday was so smoky that by 6 p.m. I just decided to go down to town and just to breathe some fresh air. And I met my son. We had dinner. He was like, "Can I have some friends over tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, that would be fine. But let them know we might have to evacuate." And he's like, "Okay." Like it was kind of like, yeah, whatever. I took a walk on West Cliff. I went grocery shopping. Anyway, I got home around 9 o'clock, and I would say, I forgot, I should go back. Jill, our neighbor, through like Monday and Tuesday, she was checking in, letting me know that, they were ready to go. And so Tuesday night, she knocked on the door and she was like, we're like, this is really serious. And she saw that we had kids there. There were a lot of cars, and she was kind of like, what is going on? You guys need to leave. Like this is it. The fire, this was probably around 10 o'clock, and the fire was at Jameson Creek in Empire, and 7 miles away. And I was like, that's 7 miles. That's so far. Like I really, at that point, still wasn't even that worried. And she's like, promise me you won't go to sleep tonight. And I was like, well, Noah's not going to go to sleep. He has friends. And she's like, no, you shouldn't go to sleep. And I didn't know about like notifications for evacuation. I wasn't getting anything, any information. She was my information. And I called my neighbor across the way, Gary and Terry, and they, I said, how you doing? It was like 10:30 at night. Like, yeah, we're doing okay. And I said, did you talk to Jill? And they're like, yep. And I said, what are you going to do? He's like, we're going to roll out of here in about 10 minutes. You should just like take a few breaths and probably get ready to go. And I still like didn't want to believe it. So I went down to the fire station. I drove down like 7 minutes away, and I met two volunteer firefighters, and they were listening to the radio. And he was like, nope, there's no mandatory evacuation. This is at 11 o'clock at night. And I said, how would I know? How would I know like when I'm supposed to evacuate? I've got a whole bunch of teenagers at my house. And he said, well, aren't you on Twitter? And I said, no. And I sat like, I'm in the parking lot of the fire station trying to download Twitter, and my hands are shaking. I'm like, I don't know how to do this, but how about if I give you my contact? If you hear there's an evacuation, can you text me? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And so I went home, and driving home, I saw this like orange glow above our house. And, like it felt like, wow, I think the fire is really close. And as I pulled into my driveway, the volunteer firefighter had texted me, the fire is now at Braymore. That's 1 mile away. You should probably think about leaving. And I got in and I just told all the kids, okay, party's over. Everyone needs to leave. And so, like 10 minutes later, the volunteer firefighter had said, it's time to go now. So that was like midnight. And I did forget to say, when I was at the fire station, the firefighter had, the volunteer firefighters, I asked him, I was like, how do you know when there's an evacuation, like when they say you're supposed to evacuate, how long do you have? Like, is it an hour, 2 hours, half an hour? And he's like, usually it's like imminent. Like, that is the time you leave. When you get the evacuation notice, you're leaving then. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. I wasn't thinking that. So, I was really nervous at that time and not thinking really clearly.
Yeah, just a very vivid description of what that experience is like. And I'm really glad you shared that people aren't always given the kind of notice that they might think they have. You're tuned to listener supported 90.7 FM KSQD Santa Cruz, K Squid, many voices, one station. And this is State of Mind, being human and living well. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and I'm here talking with disaster response expert and Red Cross volunteer, Dr. Diane Bridgman, and wildfire survivors, Sarah and Sam Clarkson, who lost their home in the recent CZU fire. Today, we're here discussing mental health recovery following a disaster. Stay with us to learn more, and we'll be right back after this brief message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks the Central Coast chapter of the American Red Cross for partnering with State of Mind. The Red Cross provides an array of services for disaster preparedness and disaster recovery. Thank you, American Red Cross, for partnering with Community Radio, K-Squid 90.7 FM.
Back to our interview. Sam, you were out of town with your daughter, and I'm wondering, how did you first learn about the situation, and how was your experience being far away different than Sarah's?
Yeah, so I first learned actually the same neighbor, Jill, bless her heart, called me at my parents, maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, and was like, Sam, I just went down to your house and I knocked on the door and nobody answered. And I said, well, that's because Sarah's sleeping upstairs with the air conditioning on and earplugs and a pillow over her head. So just go ahead, go on in the house, knock on the door, wake her up. And I was connected. Like, for some reason, I registered my phone as at that address. So I was getting, the evacuation warnings. And I'm a little more savvy on social media. So I was trying to keep track of what was going on with the fires. Our daughter, so I had taken our daughter to South Carolina to university and then come back to Tennessee where I grew up and was spending a week with my parents. And, Maya was really aware because the first fire in Bonnie Doon was really close to a barn where she used to work. And so she was talking to me about, if somebody could borrow our truck and use the horse trailer to get horses out of the barn. So I think on some level through social media, I was a little bit more aware of the whole picture. So, when Sarah called, she was like, what do you want to get out? I'm like, well, we're going to be evacuated. Grab some surfboards so we can surf, and grab my wetsuits. And, I wasn't, the denial of the fact that, like, oh, this is it, this is the fire, because we had, like Sarah said, we had been evacuated in the Martin fire and then the Lockheed fire, which I thought would have taken the mountain, didn't. And so I think there was, like, I didn't know that this was the third strike. So I kind of, I wasn't thinking about not coming back. I was just thinking about not being at home. So that was kind of where I was at. And I think, yeah, so, I was just, I kind of ruined my last week with my parents that I was just on the computer trying to figure out what was going on in Bonnie Doon. That,
Sure.
and that's like, if you talk about something that a community could improve for all the fires, there's this lack of communication. Every time we've been evacuated, you can't get information. There's no news. There's nobody. So in the first fire, we were in Bonnie Doon, and I would get on my mountain bike and, like, ride down to the fire station because you couldn't drive, because if you drove, you couldn't get home. just like some way to get information out to everyone. And I think we have the technology. It's just hasn't been developed to really give people a clear, awareness of what the situation is.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah. Diane, I'm thinking about when you and I spoke earlier, you mentioned that not all people impacted by a disaster are traumatized. So I wondered if you could maybe speak to what makes the difference between those who are and those who are not.
Right. There's been a great deal of research looking at why some people are affected in certain ways as opposed to other ways. And so much of it is prior to the disaster, the state of the person, or have they experienced previous disasters or not? Are they coping with some disabilities or some unique characteristics that make it more difficult for them to deal with um, whatever the disaster might be? People who have a pre-existing condition and can't function as well or handle it as well might be impacted more, might have more fear and anxiety, understandably. Um, whether a person does not want to leave when they should leave, that will make a major difference in how the fear and the trauma they might experience, especially if they're forced to leave the area. So also, how healthy is a person to begin with in terms of have they had other previous disasters or previous traumas in their life that they haven't resolved that could be provoked and causing them more difficulties at this time? And when the disaster occurs can make a difference how someone's going to cope. If it's in the evening or in the morning, if they're alone or with someone else, what type of disaster is it? All those specific variables can influence how it might be registered by that person and to what extent.
So part of the reason I asked that question then, Sam, is because I had heard from other people that for some people, when they were far away and not right there as part of it, it was harder for them. Um, the sense of not being able to do something. And I wondered if that was, you said you spent the rest of the week on social media watching, trying to figure it out. And I imagine that was a really stressful experience without any of the sort of seeing other people going through it along with you.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, I think our daughter, who was even farther removed, like I did come home on Thursday after the fire, or come back to Santa Cruz. So not so much in the event, but in the aftermath. I was there. I smelled the smoke. I drove up. I saw the devastation of the whole mountain. And I think for our daughter, it was probably harder because, she just sort of, she was just the kid on the freshman dorm whose house burned down, you know, like trying to adapt to being a freshman in college and being the one whose house is gone, and not having her, not having the ability to connect with her friends who are also displaced, and not smelling the smoke and not being a part of the community. I think, it was certainly early on, it was harder, I think, for her. We were all, and there's something too, which maybe Diane, more about, like, the state of shock, or it comes in, and, for better or worse, you distance yourself on some level from what's going on. And that like when you're driving up the mountain and the mountain's on fire and you see your house burned, you don't have time. You're not going to grieve. You got to get out of the mountain. It's not a time to just curl up in bed and so yeah, so there is that sort of displacement of emotion or something like that it's a survival strategy. I know that if followed too far, it can definitely cause mental health issues, but I think on some level it's important.
We've also heard from some other community members who went through evacuating as well. And we have one contribution from a community member that we'd like to share. And I'm going to go ahead and play that.
Shock and flee. It was late afternoon when a column of smoke began to rise over the horizon. Fires in the valley always make us watchful, but they are usually contained quickly. Halfway through my son's Zoom class, a young student suddenly began shrieking. Her house in Bonnie Doon was being evacuated, and no one could find their cat. No one was able to mute her, and for several minutes we listened helplessly to her panic cries as she ran up and down the stairs, screaming with her phone in her hand. "Mama, will we be okay? Will our kitty be okay? Will our house be okay? Mama, Mama!" I imagined what it was like for her mother, having to grab whatever she could, unable to comfort her terrified child. A few hours later, the evacuation order came for Boulder Creek. As night fell, I could see the flames rise behind the town from my window. I watched through the night while my family slept. What if an ember landed here? We would have no warning. I started packing instruments and photo albums. I was thankful that for years we have kept an updated fire evacuation list, because even though the fires were still several miles away, my mind was completely blank. Everything in me said, "Get out. Just get out." Packing to evacuate was different for me than for my Bonnie Doon friends. We were granted the time they did not have. That time was filled with 1,000 goodbyes, 1,000 moments of grief as I looked at all the things that must be left behind. I said silent farewells to each one, remembering with gratitude the moments of life they represented and the joys they held. The hardest was the piano. I know it like my own hands. I cried hard and then went back to packing. We left before the evacuation order came. All our neighbors left at the same time. It was 109 degrees while we carried boxes out to the cars. As we drove out of the neighborhood, we stopped to wish one neighbor well. "You have a place to go?" we asked each other. Our children had trick-or-treated at his house since they were big enough to walk. He was always so happy to see them. Would this be the last time I saw him? We waved goodbye. "Hope to see you soon," we said.
Sam, Sarah, I wonder as you listen to that person's story if there was anything in there that you could relate to yours or that really that you'd want to mention because you think there's a commonality there.
I wish I had a list. I was not that prepared, and I wish I had brought more photo albums. I, I remember that the first, I guess the Martin fire, I actually did load up the car with like every photo album and took everything off the wall. And it was such a pain to put back. I was like, I'm not going to do that again. But out of my laziness, and I wish that I hadn't been so lazy and that I had just done it because I wish I had some of those things now.
Sam, was there anything that you heard that
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there, but I mean, definitely experiencing grief. I mean, I randomly get choked up when I see fire trucks or the signs around town. You know, um, no, thank you, firefighters. It's like, I mean, and there is this deep well of gratitude that people are willing to, take firefighting on, and at the same time, didn't work out for us. And I definitely, if you allow me to just like proselytize a little bit about handmade ceramics, we had thousands of handmade pots in our house. We had been collecting for 25 years. And, friends, each pot has a story. Every time you take clay and you fire it, it becomes a recording of a human interaction with earth and with fire, with water. And, and they're all unique and they all tell a story. And, just I thought more would survive. I thought because they'd been to 2,350 degrees that they'd kind of be able to, that was my that was my assumption, that more would survive, and very, very, very little did in any usable, certainly no usable state. So yeah, there's definitely grief, and I've only had one really good cry since since the fire, which was kind of cathartic. That happened when I got when I got my surfboards back. They were at Sarah's, our sister-in-law's house. Noah had left them off, and at that point, well, still, I owned 6 pairs of underwear that I had packed to take to Tennessee, and Noah had gotten 8 surfboards out of the house. And just like, it's just a thing, but to be reunited with something that's provided so much joy, and just like this combination of like allowing the devastation in and knowing that I'm not dead. You didn't win, fire. You didn't get me.
Mm-hmm.
So that, this is sort of those two. There's this kind of warrior energy, and just like, like, I'm not dead, I'm here. And yet, just like, can my mom come and wake me up now from this dream? Like, those two things going on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sam. You're tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM KSQD, K-Squid, and this is State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. We're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. And you can find the podcasts of all our shows on Apple and Google Podcasts and on the KSQD website. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and in this show, we're discussing mental health recovery following a disaster. And with us today to talk about this are disaster response expert and Red Cross volunteer, Dr. Diane Bridgman, and survivors, Sarah and Sam Clarkson, whose Bonnie Doon home burned down in the recent CZU wildfire. I want to remind listeners that any of the resources we talk about in the show can be found on our website, ksqd.org/state-of-mind/. Back to our interview. Diane, did you want to address anything in terms of what Sam shared and what you've seen more broadly in disasters?
There's a couple points there, Deborah, I could comment on. Yes. Back to the recording too, which is very powerful. And just thinking about the one more layer that we're all dealing with is COVID, and how this has all been complicated by the fact all of us have gone through so much, the many months of COVID and sheltering in place, and some of the what's gone on economically for a lot of people, and what's going on for people of color, and then what's going on with the wildfires. We keep building these different layers, and each one makes it more problematic often to move forward. So it's really important. In the mental health profession, we really have been aware that things were probably going to get worse before they get better in terms of people's mental health, just because it's been so accumulative, and how we have to be aware that people just can't process one thing and leave and go on to the next thing. The layers do affect us. So we're trying to help people be aware of what can happen when there's so many traumas together. And we talk about, there's, I call it the trifecta of 3 areas that we to be aware of when some of these accumulations grow. And it tends to be things like substance abuse, spousal abuse, and suicidology, those 3. And we're seeing more of that, as we thought we would, since COVID, and then since some of the economic issues, and now we have the wildfires. So we have to be vigilant and be really careful and kind to figure out what can we do to help people navigate this. And Sarah pointed out some wonderful things about how we can even use this as a learning experience, and which would then build resilience. we go to our vulnerable place. She went to a place of not wanting to be alone in the building, that's been problematic for her, and understandably for different people, different things. But she faced it, she addressed it. And as a result, she's probably going to be stronger because of it. And so that's giving her a new layer of resilience to help her cope now and down the line, talking maybe with the rabbis. And this is the area I call trusted reciprocity, when you can be with someone who you can trust and you can talk about your foibles or your problems or your weaknesses and not feel embarrassed, not feel they're going to take advantage of you or tease you, or what you'll be able to do is to learn from it, and they're going to be there just to hold and support as you learn through this situation that you can do this. And that is what I see as building resilience. And therefore now for Sarah and for Sam, you're going to be able to handle some situations even better than you thought you would, because that newfound resilience is there to help you as you move through different phases of life. So I just think it's really important that we be patient with ourselves too, and we know that certain environments can just allow us to move forward and move through this, and to be open to that possibility.
I think that's a really good lead in to the next piece of that story that I want to share with you.
Subsistence and survival. We were fortunate to have a soft landing at our friend's house where we could park our RV with water and electricity. But landing didn't stop the huge feelings, and we still had no time to process them. There were endless urgent problems to solve. Why does the internet keep crashing? How on earth are the kids going to be able to do distance learning while we also have to work remotely, all from the tiny space within the RV? Where can we find reliable fire updates? Did that friend get safely evacuated? What are we going to eat? We couldn't find anything because there were so many of us and the dog in such a small space. Doing anything took 10 times longer than it should have. Managing it all took whatever bandwidth I had left. One of my biggest griefs about this passage was that I couldn't be there for my kids in the way I wanted to be. I wanted to ask them how they were doing, but I knew that I wasn't solid enough to be able to hear their answers. I knew they had things to talk about, and I wished I could have had enough left to be able to be more present for them. The initial anxiety and panic of evacuation gave way to brain fog, numbness, and headaches. All my muscles were sore at the time. I couldn't eat, and when I did, the stomach acid was too much. I felt empty and irritable. Everything felt like too much. Every night I would wake at 3 a.m. or 5 a.m., sometimes with nightmares. Over the next few days, we got news from several other families that their houses had burned or the fire had burned within feet of their properties, and were still waiting for a definite answer. Friends traded the best websites for fire updates. Texts went back and forth among the evacuees. Good news, bad news, rumors, hearsay. Resources were spread thin from the lightning strikes all over California. Zero containment. Social media was a valuable way to connect, keep family and loved ones updated, pool knowledge, and find practical resources. But it came with exposure to re-traumatizing images and content. The people who delight in catastrophizing, and those posts that spread completely unfounded and untrue information. I avoided endless surfing for information about the fire, but I know friends who had trouble turning it off.
Sarah, did you want to say anything about how you're finding yourself coping, either, things that have been helpful or maybe aren't as skillful?
My closest friends also lost their homes, and we're all living on the Upper West Side. And these are my walking partners, and so we're continuing to walk together, text each other. Um, one has insurance, the other doesn't, and so I always feel like, okay, if you don't have insurance, that's really difficult. She's got a whole other difficult life right now, and she's got an 8-year-old. So I feel like she's got a whole different scenario than I have. I mean, I have a 17-year-old at home right now I think he's doing okay. He's still surfing when there's surf, and I think he's going to get to practice soccer today. Um, for me, I just started practicing yoga. Like Monday was my first class back. which felt really great, but it had been really hard to practice again. And walking has helped a lot. And I'd say coming to work is really grounding for me. Being in this office, even I don't know, it just that routine. I mean, I remember that first weekend when after we had like, reunited and Sam was there, we were staying in the hotel. We went to Costco and I was like, I need to buy hard boiled eggs and oatmeal. Like, I need to have my like breakfast routine again. And like, as soon as I have my hard boiled egg and my oatmeal, everything's going to be okay. So that was kind of where I started, like I need to like eat the foods that I used to eat and just like try to, I felt I really loved my life before this fire, and I really am trying to get back there and trying to get back into. I think routine really helps me. I'm not quite there yet. I'm trying to walk every morning, and I think once I start practicing more regularly with yoga, my one of my yoga teachers also lost her home in her beautiful Redwood Grove where we were practicing outside, and she's been writing a lot, and I've just been appreciating reading her writings.
I'm wondering, Diane, as you listen to Sarah talk about coping, are there any pieces that you want to generalize that, you know, really are good strategies for people following um, a disruption and loss like this?
Yes. Well, we're hearing from two exceptionally wise people. I think Sarah and Sam have been exemplary in what they're trying to do. It doesn't mean they're always achieving what they're trying to do, but they're certainly working beautifully at it. And that is some of the basic strategies almost everybody knows about trying to maintain a bit of a routine, as Sarah was just saying, how helpful that can be. And make sure you have time with people you care about and feel connected, and time in nature and time exercising. There's this whole issue about social connection I just want to stress. There's a very brief study I want to mention here that really spells it out beautifully. It's the longest study that's ever taken place by Waldinger at Harvard. In 1938, he started a study where he interviewed young boys and he followed them through till their adult age to find out what life was like for them and how they were coping with life. And the finding is very interesting finding. The one variable that got defined in terms of its importance was not their educational level or their income level or their genes. It was their level of social connectedness. Those who felt socially connected to someone or some people seemed to fare so much better physically and emotionally because of that. And so that's what's being echoed here by Sarah and Sam, and that you hear from everybody else in advice about trying to stay connected, but at a level that feels right and comfortable for you, and how important that is. And to take time to also, again, I keep saying, be gentle with yourself here. Some people will say, well, you have to follow this structure, you have to do that. You really have to be able to say, yes, this might be healthy for me to do these next few steps, but I don't feel like I can do it. That's okay too. And I really think being very careful to be kind to yourself brings me to one more quick quote. Henry James had said, three things to remember to really do well in this world. And they are: number one, be kind; number two, be kind; and number three, be kind. And I think our whole community could um, do so well. And I tend to think we see our community this way, as a kind and loving and collaborative community. And I think we need to continue to nurture that in whatever ways that might be. Community groups, people of different ages helping different people. People who have gone through a lot already have learned a lot that they can share and help us, whether it be peer related groups, people with other earlier mental health problems who now have learned a lot and can help us, and we can learn from them. Our elderly, who sometimes we want to be protective of, also have enormous wisdom in their age and can help us. Our places of faith, our places where we gather, our service clubs, our community groups. We need to nurture that more, and not wait until the next terrible disaster, earthquake, wildfire, but now, how to learn from what we've just experienced and how to make it even more workable for us to navigate these difficult situations when they come.
You're tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM KSQD K-Squid, community radio for the Monterey Bay. And this is State of Mind, being human and living well. We're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and I'm here talking with disaster response expert and Red Cross volunteer, Dr. Diane Bridgman, and Sarah and Sam Clarkson, who lost their home in the recent CZU fire. Today, we're discussing mental health recovery following a disaster. Stay with us to learn more, including information about local resources. We'll be right back after this brief message from our underwriter.
KSQD thanks Family Service Agency of the Central Coast for supporting this program. Family Service Agency provides counseling and support for people of all ages facing life crises and challenges. You can reach them at 423-9444 to see if they can help you. Thank you, Family Service Agency of the Central Coast, for supporting KSQD 90.7 FM.
Back to our interview. I want to play the last piece in the story that we received from a community member because I think it speaks a lot to turning toward the next phase, which is the recovery phase.
We've been through a lot. I was grateful for all the people who called and texted and emailed to check on us, but I never knew how to respond when people said, "Are you okay?" It seemed impossible to answer. Yes, I'm okay because I didn't die, and my loved ones are physically safe. But no, I'm not okay at all. I'm shaken and numb. But even that was too difficult an answer to formulate in the moment. All the feelings were complex. I felt sad and relieved and stressed and grateful and irritable and empty all at the same time. I was grateful for the friends who had patience to listen and to a long and complicated answer. My story was big, and there were hard parts I needed to say out loud. Some parts I still need to say out loud. One friend checked in on me every morning. He asked and kept asking. He seemed to know that the answer would change. I appreciated that he understood that and gave me the space to feel whatever was there. One of the most helpful things I heard from another friend was, "You've been through a lot." Once they knew we had safely evacuated, a lot of people said to me, "I'm just glad you're safe," or "Things are just things and they can be replaced." I knew they meant well, but for me and my friends, the hard truth is that some of those objects can never be replaced. Some are linked to people who may be gone from our lives. Some are essential tools of our trade or essential parts of our creative life. Some took a lifetime to be able to afford. We need permission to grieve the loss of our possessions and the safety of our homes. When the evacuation order was finally lifted and we were able to go home, our feelings were pretty mixed. I am grateful. I am so grateful I can't put it into words. But I wanted all my friends to be able to go home too. My heart is heavy, grieving what some of them no longer have, the safety and comfort of home, and the knowledge that there is nothing I can do to change that for them. And the fact that I can go home and they can't creates an obstacle between us. It's hard to know what to say. I don't want to complain within their hearing because their loss feels immeasurably greater than my experience. I feel grief for them. I don't even know all the things they feel for me. I'm a therapist and I don't know how to talk about the difficult, awkward stuff. But this is too raw and new and hard for anyone to be able to talk about yet. And there is still anxiety. Are we safe? Anything can happen. Home has always felt like a sanctuary, but now our sense of safety in the world, already fragile after COVID, has taken another big hit. And when you come home to all the objects that hold such meaning for you and your loved ones, you realize how quickly all those things could still be lost. To come to terms with this requires a huge piece of inner work that is beyond me at the moment. As I write this, we are under a red flag warning and the winds are beginning to gust. Like a rabbit, I feel caught between the desire to freeze, motionless, or bolt to escape. I think it will be a long time until I feel safe again.
Diane, in that last story, I could hear the speaker talked about just feeling that sort of chasm between she and her neighbors in terms of the difference of their experience, and that everyone that while our whole community went through this disaster together, the effect on people was so greatly different and the impacts. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice to people as they sort of navigate that among their friends and neighbors, and how to best navigate that sort of grand difference.
Right. Right. Sometimes it can be helpful to be able to offer some support to the people who have been the most impacted, and that can help you feel better to know you're not doing it to feel better, but it does in fact help you feel better. But it can be very helpful to find out what's needed the most in your community, and there's so many groups that are doing so much. There are places where food is being served and they need people to help gather the food and put it out for people. There are places that are providing the clothes, helping people fill out forms. Finding those places in your community and offering to help. And we know to help others does help ourselves as well in that process. And I think understanding that uh, volunteering can be in itself brings a lot of rewards. I mean, even research shows it can help you, one, feel socially connected, which we know for what I was saying is so important to us, but it also helps people live longer when they volunteer. It's just interesting research on that. And you feel like you're doing your part to help your community come together. You may not have been impacted directly by any means, but you're doing your piece to this major thing that happened to your whole community. You can feel part of it and be making a contribution that can be very much appreciated. So we need people to know how they can help, and maybe having the lists and PSA messages, and people to see, okay, here's a whole selection of things I can do. Maybe I can try to fit that in this week, or my neighbor and I can try to do this if I can. I think it can make our community stronger and better, and it will certainly help you feel better as well.
Thank you, Diane. That seems like a perfect time to mention that there are two local groups that I know are working on the sort of ongoing long-term needs following the recovery. The Volunteer Center of Santa Cruz is one of them, and also the Community Foundation is also working on long-term relief efforts. So we will have links to all of those on our resource page for this show. There's so much more I would love to be asking you. Your responses have been so powerful and rich. I just really want to thank you both. And as we come toward the end of our time, um, I just wonder, Sam, if you had any advice for any other people who might be going through a disaster based on what you've learned.
Well, do what you love, don't forget to do what you love. Like, I love to go surfing, and definitely the days I get in the water, you know I'm just another guy in the lineup, and that feels good. Yeah, and to have, I don't know, I mean, there are things you can say, but it just so much depends on where people are, right? Like, just have a perspective that it's not, this isn't your new state of being. This is just part of the cycle.
Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that?
I just wanted to add how grateful I am to Temple Bethel has been an amazing resource for me and the rabbis here. I mean, these are my coworkers and the staff here, but I just feel like they're doing so much. There are several members who have lost their homes, so they're really providing quite a bit of support, and I'm feeling it personally. And also Santa Cruz Yoga. I mean, that was a second home for me too, and they've been reaching out, and I feel like I'm stepping back in, even from Zoom, and maybe live in person soon. They just started that this week, but I just being with those people and practicing with them again has been a great resource for me.
Thank you so much. I mean, as I'm listening to you talk and really being present with what you are going through, I just want to thank you so much for taking time and the willingness to recount your story and share your experiences. And like you said, Sam, I do think those first person accounts are so powerful. So thank you. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and I want to say thank you again to my guests today, Dr. Diane Bridgman and Sam and Sarah Clarkson. And thanks to you for joining us here on State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. To hear more conversations about mental health and wellness here on California's Central Coast, join me on the first Sunday of every month from 6 to 7 p.m. right here at K-Squid 90.7 FM. Special thanks to Jeannie Boldzikowski for audio production and to Jennifer Young, who assists with research and outreach. And thanks to acoustic guitarist Adrian Legg for composing, performing, and donating the use of our theme music. You can find all the podcast episodes of this show on our ksqd.org website by typing State of Mind in the search bar, or subscribe and get them directly delivered to your listening device on either Apple or Google Podcasts. You can also listen to us here at K-Squid through your home smart speaker just by saying, play KSQD on TuneIn. This is listener-supported community radio, so that means we want and we need to hear from you. Your support keeps programs like this one on the air. So please go to ksqd.org and renew or become a new member. Our fall pledge drive starts tomorrow morning, October 5th, and we hope to hear from you. Also, if you like this or any of the previous State of Mind episodes, please help the shows get found and heard by more listeners by leaving us a rating and a review on Apple and Google Podcasts. This is KSQD Santa Cruz. Just remember, 90.7 FM, K-Squid, your ink spot on the dial. Stay with us.